Today's episode is brought to you by the University of Hawaii, College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, and the Livestock Extension Group.
Aloha, welcome everyone to the Livestock Walaʻau, a podcast aimed to provide educational support, information, guidance, and outreach to our livestock stakeholders in Hawaii. We are your hosts, Mele Oshiro and
Shannon Sand.
Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Bradley Kai Fox, who is the Hawaii Aquaculture Extension Specialist with the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College Program, or Hawaiʻi Sea Grant. Dr. Fox conducts research, education, and extension activities as part of a newly developed aquaculture hub across Hawaii and the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands. His program aims to address production challenges in Hawaii and those U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands. So thank you, Dr. Fox, or Kai, for being here today.
Yes.
We're so glad you're able to come and talk story with Shannon and I.
Yep.
And
no problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad that we were able to get connected and get you on the show. So you're currently working with the Hawaiʻi Sea Grant. And would you like to share more about how you came to your current position there and kind of what your program is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. So I guess I can just give you guys a little bit of background on Sea Grant. A lot of people aren't too familiar with it. Sea Grant the Sea Grant program in the United States sort of models the land grant. It models the CTAR and Sea Grant. And our program in Hawaii was founded in 1968 at UH Manoa and was actually designated a program in 1972. So it's not nearly as old, right? CTAR is sort of the founding college of UH Manoa, the UH system. But it was basically formed in response to try to do similar things that the land grant does, but using taking care of like coastal resources and freshwater resources. So not every state has a Sea Grant. I think there's about 34 programs, but it's all the Great Lakes states and all the coastal states have Sea Grant program. So it's again fashioned in a similar way. We have researchers, instructors, and extension.
Nice.
It's an organized research unit of the School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology, or SOST. Right, the sort of companion college of CTAR. And we have statewide and Pacific-wide duties and responsibilities. I can just give you kind of generally our mission, because a lot of people aren't really sure exactly what we do either. So our mission is to provide, again, the same kind of thing: research, extension, and education to promote sustainability of coastal and marine resources across Hawaii and the Pacific region. And we have four general focus areas: healthy coastal ecosystems, resilient communities and economies, environmental literacy and workforce development, and the focus area that I'm most involved with, which is sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. So a lot of our extension and research faculty are involved with things like, king tides, climate change, tourism in Waikiki, integrating or interfacing between like the hotel industry and the public, and the beach, the sand addition in Waikiki Beach, that kind of stuff.
Right.
We have a really kind of long history in aquaculture. So on the continent, a lot of the aquaculture in the past has been with land grant, actually, and there are land grant like Auburn University, right? Does a lot of work. They're probably the biggest and fanciest aquaculture university in the US, right? And they have about 1,000 acres of freshwater ponds, and they have a marine component in Mississippi, right? So, in Hawaii, we have we have slightly different opportunities and resources, right? Mostly seawater that's what we're surrounded by, right? So we've been involved as Sea Grant in things like Limu farming back like in the 70s and 80s. We were involved in the prawn hatchery that was developed, the first macrobrachium hatchery in, I think, the world, actually. It was in Afrak, down in Sand Island. And then when the host park developed, Noha, on your guys' island in Kona, we were involved in deep ocean, cold water aquaculture research with salmonids, trout, salmon, that kind of stuff back in the early 80s. And since then, a lot of stuff is kind of, some industries have developed from that. we were involved with the marine shrimp program in the 80s and 90s, and you know, that's a significant portion of the aquaculture industry here, actually, is SPF broodstock shrimp.
Right.
And then also, you know, a lot of research in feeds technology, local feeds technology, because just like, you know, terrestrial livestock, feed is really one of the main issues,
here.
right?
Yes,
it's always like that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys remember the offshore cage project in the late 90s, early 2000s off of Eva, where we're growing moi. I was actually a part of that project. Initially, that was a Sea Grant project. I was a diver, and I was part of the finfish program at Oceanic Institute at that time. And that kind of really started me in this field. And then, you know, Sea Grant's been involved with a lot of local, you know, Native Hawaiian fish pond work throughout the years. We've developed a sort of a roadmap, a protocol, if you will, like format for interfacing between researchers and kia'i and local ia communities, so that there's a sort of a reciprocity, there's sort of even flow of information and resources between the two communities, called the Kulana no I'i. It's one of our extension products that we're very proud of. And then as far as Pacific Regional Extension, we work closely with our partners in Department of Interior and land grant programs throughout the Pacific, in Palau, Marshall Islands, RMI, American Samoa, CNMI, FSM, and Guam. We have partners throughout the Pacific. So kind of circling back, I know, sorry, that was a lot, just to kind of circle back to how, I just wanted to give you guys kind of like right where we're at. To how I came to this job. In the late 90s and early 2000s, we had a really strong program in the state called the Aquaculture Development Program, ADP. And that was mostly funded by the state, although we had some half-time aquaculture extension positions through Sea Grant, about 5 or 6 of them, one on Maui, one on Hawaii Island, a couple on Oahu. They all sort of had statewide duties. In the Great Recession, 2008, right, 2009, it hit us. It took a big hit, right? We basically lost that fund. That funding went away. We basically lost our extension capacity at Sea Grant. ADP pretty much disappeared. So there hasn't been much extension since about that time, for the past, maybe 10 years after that, right? What's been happening recently, though, is we've had a lot of congressional directed initiatives through NOAA, which is our sort of parent federal agency, to fund aquaculture. They've decided to put money into it. So because of that, we've at Hawaiʻi Sea Grant have secured a couple large grants, which led to the funding of my position. And we actually have my colleague, Shuri Kauai, in Hilo. She's based at UH Hilo. Shuri Kauai. She's from that area, from Keaukaha area. And so we were able to hire the two of us. She's an extension agent there in aquaculture.
Oh, nice.
And one of the projects actually is a collaboration with CTAR. It's with Dr. Andre Seal. Do you guys know? Andre? Have you met him? Yeah. So it's integrating land and sea grant aquaculture research and extension. And what we're doing with that project is building out the UH Manoa facility at Magoon. He's calling it Terek. So expanding that capacity so that, Manoa will now have it's actually going to be a recirculating large aquaponic or aquaculture and aquaponic research
I was just
lab.
like, I'm always so interested in aquaponics when you said that. I was like, I'm from Florida originally, so I'm like, I'm always interested in just a closed circuit. I just think it's so neat. I don't necessarily get all the science behind it because I'm an economist. But I was like, I just think it's so fascinating.
Exactly. And it's really the what we're seeing, I think, globally too, is both offshore cage culture, mariculture, right? And what you're referring to, recirculating aquaculture systems or RAS technology, are becoming economically viable. So, the economics is the most important part of it. So
I'm available if you need help.
yeah, we need economists to understand it, right? Otherwise, the private sector is never going to buy in. But what we're seeing now is the private sector is buying it. They're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into projects, right? Which means
for sure
they think it's going to make money, right?
Yeah.
So it's really exciting time. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of work with that, Nordic countries have been doing the cage culture stuff for decades now, and they've really refined it. So I would say that they're probably leaders in the world right now. But as far as RAS technology, Europeans and then some East Asian countries have really pushed forward on that, using the water to the point where you're exchanging only about 1% of the water per day on land.
Yeah.
The nice thing about those systems, though, is you can build them anywhere, right? And it's the same issues in ag as right. It's all similar. So the cold chain, transportation costs, all of that. So you can literally right. Yeah. So you can build these things in cities or right next to cities. You don't need a water source. You don't even need seawater at this point. They're building seawater shrimp farms in Minnesota right now. Recirculating systems. So, anyway, so we've got that funding, and then this is the last thing I was just going to say is the other major grant that is funding my position right now. I'm actually a soft money faculty member, so I'm constantly hustling. Right, me and Sheree and I are constantly hustling.
I get it.
Is a hub consortium. So it's Pacific, Hawaii Pacific Aquaculture Consortium, and all the partners I listed before. We have folks, sprinkled throughout the Pacific region, and we work together to leverage that and look for bigger funding.
Very cool. So the hub, I guess, again, like my background is like ag econ business. So when you say a hub, I'm thinking like a clearinghouse or like a aggregator of like some sort of food, whether that's livestock, protein, honey, whatever, or like vegetables. So is that what this is going to be? Or is that or is this different, more like information or sorry, I was just like,
no, that's a really good question. Right. It's not so much a physical production hub, right? It's more of a sort of intellectual hub of getting our partners together, leveraging their resources and working together. So like, for example, right now Sheree and I are writing, I think 3 pretty good sized grants with our partners in American Samoa and Guam. And, we're going to share those resources because especially with the U.S. territories, right, the congressional money is meant to be distributed throughout the Pacific, right? So when you work together, you have a really good chance of securing funding and then also addressing local challenges. A lot of their challenges are similar.
Same as here.
In different islands, but a lot of them are very different. American Samoa is very different from Guam, very different from CNMI and Palau, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting because we did when I first started and I was back as a research assistant, we had a big grant working with outreach down in the CNMI and Palau and FSM and all that. So it's funny because it's just not funny, but I mean, it's just the correlations between the issues that they deal with is very similar, but yet different.
Very different.
Right? Yeah. So that's very good. Nice. Exciting.
Yeah. So that's cool. So can you tell us a little bit more about some other projects you're working on right now? Or are those kind of the main ones that you've got going?
So what's nice about those projects are they're really overarching and other projects can sort of be folded into them. So Sheree and I have been really fortunate over the past year and a half or so. We've gotten about 4 projects funded. Projects funded. Good. Yeah.
Awesome.
And so some of them are related to Localia. Sheree's gotten a couple of grants to do work with getting the Localia community together, organizing meetings, identifying doing like needs assessment and really trying to understand what is the need of the community in terms of moving forward. Is it restoration, invasive species, and then is there a want or a need to take another step, like integrating conventional aquaculture or, trying to make money with a fish pond. So there's a very diverse approach and need and want for that. So we're working on that, working closely with KUA, which is the statewide network, and the Hui Malama Localia and the Limu Hui, also the statewide Limu Hui. So that's kind of one thing we're doing. We also are looking at, we got a Sea Grant project that I'm working pretty hard, pretty feverishly on right now, because there's a timing is all kind of coming together at once. But we're working with Waikulua Localia, which is a fish pond in South Kaneohe Bay. That fish pond is owned by the Pacific American Foundation, and so we've had a partnership with them for a long time. They're about 11-acre pond. They're not huge, but they do a lot of cool stuff with Windward Community College and a lot of the surrounding high schools and middle schools, Castle High School, a lot of educational stuff. But they're also interested in doing contemporary aquaculture, like sort of integrating the two together. So what we're doing, just to back up a little bit, put it in context, one of the things that Native Hawaiian fish pond practitioners are interested in is obviously bringing back the ia, whether that be, whatever kind of fish that is, but specifically there's a couple that are high on the list. One is the ama, mullet, the striped mullet, and one is the ava, or the milkfish. Those are kind of the two traditionally raised. These are herbivorous fish, so they're, we can liken them to cattle. They're sort of low on the food chain, right? They feed on the primary producers, right? The aquatic plants. But for a number of reasons, invasive species, overfishing, pollution, just poor state of the local ias themselves, there's, low numbers of these animals in the ponds. So, so what's happened in the past is there have been several efforts to try to use hatchery raised animals. So like, for instance, at the Oceanic Institute, they developed hatchery methods for striped mullet back in I think the 80s. So this has been known for a long time. They actually did tech transfer around the world at that time. Indonesia, Egypt, they moved it all around the world, the technology for that, and milkfish. So we've had a lot of impact, as a state around the world, but we haven't brought it back to ourselves. Locally. We haven't educated ourselves, and our public about it, which is really unfortunate. So that's what we're trying to do now. So Oceanic Institute is able to produce pua ama, babies, right? And there's been efforts in the past where they've released them into local ia with not the greatest result. So there's a lot of reasons for that. Again, we actually don't know all of the reasons, but predatory birds, is a big one, and there's poaching, there's all kinds of stuff. But the bottom line is these are naive animals, right? They were raised in a sterile hatchery, and
so they don't have the instinct.
There's some issues with that. So there's still a desire to do that, though. So what we secured this funding. We're calling it the Pua Boot Camp. It's what the idea is to get the naive fish, bring them into a tank-based system adjacent to the local ia, use the actual local ia water, filter it to the point where we can take out the parasites, but not to the point where we kill all the microbiome and all of the living stuff, right? And expose the animals in a controlled environment, grow them up, increase the size at release, and then hopefully we increase survival. So that's something we're getting all the tanks delivered. We're getting all this, we're building all the plumbing. And we're doing that right now.
Yeah. I mean, that must have a big impact on them, right? And the survival rate of being able to adjust to their natural environments, getting out there. It's probably, it's like throwing your kid out the door without exposing him to grass, right? but same with any other animal too. Yeah.
You would think so, right? Yeah. And so this is all theoretical, by the way. We're just we're hoping that that's the case. But there's a lot of stuff, right? Even with humans, with I always use the example of fecal transplant. It's becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
Because
for the biome,
the microbiome in the gut. Because if you do not have, colostrum for baby ungulate, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't give them that, they cannot survive, right? Yeah. They need that injection into their gut because it's not in their gut. It's the same. I think it's the same. And there are some studies coming out with fish. If you just throw them in the wild, I mean, they've been eating pellets, right?
Right. I mean, it kind of makes sense. We just had Dr. Jha on previously. Yeah. And his area of expertise, he does a lot in poultry, but he specifically does a lot in livestock biomes. And so I was like, oh, yeah, this kind of makes sense now.
Yeah. And it's a very hot topic in a lot of the different areas. And in livestock or any animal science, and talking about those aspects of using those areas to kind of improve efficiency and health of the animals. So that's very interesting.
It's exciting. Yeah.
Continue. Sorry.
No. Yeah. So we're gonna try. We're really hoping that we'll succeed. Well, we're hoping, and then so we're gonna build a series of a couple dozen tanks, right? Mm-hmm. These animals are gonna land in about half of the tanks. Yeah. Where we're gonna raise the fish. We're gonna invite Kia'i. We've already invited them. This is gonna be an Oahu project first, but hopefully, if this works, other locally are interested in adopting this. We're gonna, write up publication whatever how to do it, right? Mm-hmm. And hopefully get their buy-in. Like, okay, so this tank is going to say Localia, Haleiwa, right? Mm-hmm. Kia'i's come in for the last maybe couple weeks, or maybe they spend time throughout when they're there just to malama the fish, and then when they're ready, we go take water quality at Localia too, right? And we're gonna have freshwater and seawater spigots on each tank. We can adjust the salinity to just get them all. Just maybe even bring some diatoms or filamentous algae from the pond, so they get that same. We're not trying to match the microbiome again, right? Mm-hmm. And then just be real nice to them, and hopefully they can survive, right?
Hopefully,
that's the idea. But the other half of the project is to take the effluent water from those tanks and run it through a series of Limu tanks. So we're going to do tumble culture Limu, hopefully maybe 3 or 4 varieties of Limu, and use the nutrients from the fish tank to grow the Limu. This is not new, but what's cool about it is you're double using the water, right? You're double using the nutrients, and it allows for it a couple of things. Mm-hmm. The fish pond operators, Pacific American Foundation, will be able to then sell some Limu.
Oh, nice.
To put the money back into the program. Mm-hmm. And then we were thinking the other sort of maybe half of it, and again, these are just sort of rough numbers, but sell Limu as a routable product. The other half maybe will provide to other community groups, like Waimanalo Limuhui, for example, is interested in taking and doing outplanting. And we've had conversations with DLNR, Division of Aquatic Resources. They're interested in partnering with us, identifying sites for restoration. So restorative aquaculture is a kind of a new buzzword now. Getting species that are depleted in the wild, it's stock enhancement, essentially. Excuse me. So that's the sort of other half is the Limu side of this project. So there's a lot of interest. The way we're kind of looking at it, and I keep telling people that this is the way we think about it is, and this is, again, thanks to all of our partners. By the way, I got to say that all of my PIs, all co-PIs, thanks to everybody, because this is a team effort, huge team effort. Pacific American Foundation in particular have been super supportive and open to this. We're thinking of it more as a public laboratory, in that sense of just allowing anybody to come in and play with seawater, because nobody really gets to, right?
Right.
I mean, it's only like the only reason all the research comes out of a few places is because they have seawater. Yeah. But this opens up the opportunity to bring school groups in. We're working with Windward Community College to develop possibly a Limu certificate through the algae, through the ATEC Foundation. So like an industry certificate, industry recognized certificate in Limu culture. This will be macroalgae, right? The Limu, but in the future, we're going to look at microalgae also. So that's the sort of pool boot camp, right? Get the pool ready.
Cool.
For that. And then kind of the other big project that's coming up, just got funded, is a NOAA SK project through, it's a partnership between Sea Grant, Pacific American Foundation again, and Hawaii Sea Farms. Hawaii Sea Farms is a aquaculture farm based at a Localia. It's a multi-generational owned Localia. The family there, local family there has been in charge. They've been kia'i of this Localia for many generations, and they've decided to kind of commercialize. They're doing clams, oysters, and some fish. But what this project is intended to do is to develop a sea cucumber industry here.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago, there was a moratorium placed on sea cucumber collection. Remember the guy that got caught us because actually Waimanalo with all hundreds of pounds, just took everything. So before that, there was no regulation on collecting. You could just collect whatever. So thankfully, there's a moratorium. So the Center for Tropical and Subtropical Aquaculture, which is USDA funded aquaculture funding agency. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them. They're based out of Ag Science Building, and they're affiliated with HenFast. They have funded in the past development of culture methods for various sea cucumbers. So we basically have the manual. We know how to do it, but nobody's doing it. So Hawaii Sea Farms is going to refine those methods and actually get to the point where they're going to produce them, and then once they produce juveniles, they're going to send them to us on Oahu. We're going to grow them out in local IA. So the goal is to provide a couple of things. Develop an industry for either sale for food as juveniles for ornamentals, like we can ship them around the world, right? I mean, people like to put them in their fish tank. It cleans the sand in their fish tank, right? And then possibly for processed, dried sale, which is one of the big markets also. These things go for $100 a pound, by the way, wet weight.
You know, growing up, I remember because again, I'm from the coast myself. I was like, they were everywhere. It's so. Yeah, that's
and there's
amazing.
There's a lot of species. Some are more desirable than others.
Yeah.
But and then hopefully if local IA, managers of Native Hawaiian fish ponds are interested in diversifying their businesses.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Right, and grow them, because really they just eat the mud.
Yeah, I mean, they're cleaner, basically, is kind of my understanding.
I did not realize the value in them, though.
No, I didn't realize they were worth so much now, because I just think of when we were kids and you just...
Right, and that's a value for the food market, the larger one, right? But there's a huge market for the small ones. And if you think about production, right? Livestock production, if you can get them out sooner, you can make more money, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, you're looking at I don't know exactly what the market is, but it's probably over $20 one for a small juvenile like this.
Well, you just said $100 a pound, and I'm like, wow. If you could get if it's cost effective to grow them and you can sell it for $100 a pound, you could make some good money potentially. As a producer, if you can refine that and get it down to where it's just,
This is probably what drove the guy to over harvest at one time, right? I mean, he was like, "Oh yeah,
if it's worth that much."
Yeah, I'm sure, right? That had to have been a big value in it. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have approached it that way. Well, that's very interesting. So it sounds like there's more, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but with livestock in my position as an agent, we have, the small producers, backyard production people, which I'm kind of relating that to your local, folks that have the native fish ponds, and they're the ones that are trying to restore that. And then you also have work with commercial producers, I guess, too, on the sense, right? On the other end. Okay. So I'm just trying to get my head around things, but it's because there's so much, right? And I think that's so important. The local fish ponds. Growing up, we were down in Anaiho'omalu every summer, and the going around we were very familiar with the fish pond that was down there, because that's just, that was the area. So when you said 11 acres was kind of small, I was like, well, it's kind of big for a pond, isn't it? I'm like, but I'm sure in the, in the production standpoint, it must not be. So that's very interesting. And, Shannon and I were saying, we didn't have a lot of knowledge or information about aquaculture here in Hawaii. I mean, I knew it surrounded us, and it's a big commodity market and whatnot. So it's very interesting. So your projects, as there's so many that I have a lot of questions, but what kind of tips, I guess, can you have for some producers that maybe want to go into aquaculture here in Hawaii, and what can you offer them as far as advice on getting started, or and maybe some other unique aspects of Hawaii aquaculture that they need to consider, before wanting or deciding to dive into that era?
Sure. Yeah, and I really didn't mention a lot of the smaller growers are not only Localia folks, but there's on Oahu specifically, the major market is freshwater.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. We're talking mostly and it's mostly a live market. It's mostly tilapia.
Yeah.
Or,
wow.
Well, aren't there specific varieties of tilapia that were developed in Hawaii? Because there's like a really beautiful one. I feel like, I want to say it's like golden something. I was looking up tilapia for a while ago because someone was asking some questions. So, yeah.
Yeah. Tilapia. Yeah. So tilapia hybridized very easily. Then there's probably about 200 species of tilapia.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And we here it's mostly so there's two general. Sorry, I'm going to get a little deep into tilapia. That's my training.
Go for it.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So there were two kind of major imports of tilapia, and they're separate genus. One is the one that people have sort of a prejudice against. I think it's the Hawaii tilapia, right? It's the one that lives in the stream, in the mud, and it's kind of
the rubbish tilapia.
The rubbish.
Sorry, that's and growing up, that's what people used to tell us.
Same. I'm like,
right? Unfortunately. So the bottom line is, right, let's just clear this up real quick. From my perspective, is you are what you eat.
Right.
You live in the alawai, you eat the alawai mud, you're going to taste like the alawai. Right? Yeah. Don't eat that
absolutely.
One. Yeah. Do not eat that. So, and those that is the black chin tilapia primarily, and that's Ceratherodon. They don't get very big, and they have a big head. If you look at them closely, they actually have a black kind of pocket under their chin. Oh. Those were actually brought in as aquatic weed control, and then also as bait fish industry. The aqua guys thought it would be a good idea to throw them off the boat and see if they ball up like the nehu and stuff. Didn't work very well. So they primarily are tilapia generally are what we call euryhaline. They can live in seawater or freshwater. Some species are more stanohaline. They prefer to live in one environment than another.
And the other.
The Ceratherodon, the black chin, is more stanohaline seawater. They like to live in saltier environments, but you will find them in maybe half seawater on a brackish. And then the other genus, which is the food tilapia, the golden one you're talking about, is Oreochromis. That's the genus. And we have probably 10 different species of Oreochromis. And those are the ones that get big.
Right.
And,
they get huge. Yeah.
You catch them in Hilo River, and they're huge. I mean, some of them are huge. There's a farmer here who has a brood stock. It's almost 20 pounds.
Wow.
Tilapia. So that's like Lua, right? I mean, that's,
that's a big boy or girl.
Yeah. And that's huge. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
So your question about, I think I wouldn't say we have a species that, that term gets kind of muddled around.
Yeah.
We definitely have varieties. We have cultivars, you could call them strains, right? That were developed here. It's fairly easy to do. Some species, the Mozambique tilapia, for example, are very saltwater tolerant. They can live in complete freshwater too, but they can live up in 2 or even 3 times seawater strength. Wow. So they're very adaptable. So but they don't grow as quickly, and they don't grow as large as some of the other varieties like the blue tilapia or Nile tilapia. So you can make hybrids, and you sort of incorporate the traits, right? So you can have animals that grow quickly.
Just like crossbreeding with any sort of livestock, basically, in a way.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I have looked into it because I had people that asked about it. Like, I have heard tilapia is actually one of the better ones to start with because it's reasonably priced, and just, again, correct me if I'm wrong. In general, they actually, they like to be together, so you can do a lot in a smaller space.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of advantages to growing tilapia. If you're thinking about getting into it, even on a small scale,
Yeah.
They're pretty sturdy animals. So, especially for aquaponics, where you're doing a recirculating system and you're purposefully, kind of making the water quality jump to feed the plants, they can survive. They're pretty tolerant to swings in dissolved oxygen, which is usually what kills fish. The acute death of fish is usually caused by either a huge temperature swing or a drop in oxygen levels. That's usually what kills them quickly. So they're really adaptable to that kind of stuff. So they're much easier to grow than any other fish. I call them the chicken of the stream.
I mean, I've had tilapia, and that you get those that are farm raised or what. It's really good. So there's no complaint on my end, but that's very interesting. Yeah, because I think we visited one farm once. I know on Maui that was doing that. They had them in the tank. So how long? What's the growth cycle? I guess to harvest something like that in your system. Yeah,
that's a really good question. I think like every livestock animal, it depends on your management, right? If all things are equal, there are allegedly varieties of tilapia that can get from egg to 1 kilogram, right, a little over 2 pounds in 6 months.
Wow, that's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Wow. For livestock, because I'm just thinking, like, I know, like, broilers go 6 weeks, but like pork takes what, 6-9 months, Melanie? Somewhere in there. And cattle 18 to 24. So that's pretty good.
And the sort of thinking about those sorts of things, comparing livestock, the food conversion ratio is close to 1.
Wow.
Yeah. So and then if you pair it with, say, vegetables or a fruit orchard,
that's what I was saying. If you did the system.
Then you're double using the water, right? You're the nutrients. So usually about 50% of the protein gets taken up by the fish. And the rest of the nitrogenous waste that comes out, usually ammonia, can easily be converted to nitrate, and you can recapture closer to 75-80% if you incorporate the vegetables in product.
Cool.
So it's a lot more efficient way. And then again, if you're managing it properly, you can reuse the water to the point where, so there's a couple different strategies to integrate. And one is recirculating. That's what people usually think of as aquaponics. The water is just going around and around. And then there's emerging style, which is also very kind of an old concept, but they're adapting it to modern technology. It's called decoupled. So the concept is you have a recirculating aquaculture system, and sometimes that water goes out one way to vegetables, either in like Dutch bucket kind of hydroponic systems or into like irrigated fruit orchard. Jensen Ueda published a really cool study up at Puamoho using Chinese catfish, decoupled aquaponic systems, sending it out through drip tape to Kalo. He found that he was able to basically replace all of the fertilizer
using that.
For the Kalo. Like, you didn't have to use any fertilizer to grow it at the same rate as a regular fertilized Kalo field. Got the same yield, basically. So I work closely with Ted Radovich. So we right now are working on a decoupled aquaponic system at the Waimanalo Ag Station, irrigating a fruit orchard of mostly avocado, different varieties, to try to get an orchard set up in Waimanalo of different varieties that will grow so we'll have year-round harvest, and we'll be able to produce a significant amount of tilapia at the same time by sort of balancing the nutrients and input on that side.
Nice.
So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Sorry, to your question about how to get started, I'm just going to plug our program that we're working with.
Oh, yay!
Cool. Yes. And we'll share. Do you guys have a website that we can share in the show notes and stuff of the podcast? So
definitely.
Going back to your use for them in a orchard farm, I mean, cool. You must have to have a large setup then for the tilapia itself, right? Based on however big your orchard. So is there a rate? Like if you have so many acres of trees, you would need a tank that's, by.
Exactly. That's the question that nobody really has the answer to right now. Mm-hmm. And that's why I love working with Ted. Been working with him for about over 10 years now.
Yeah.
Brought him over to the dark side of aquaponics. He loves it though. He's really published a lot of cool stuff. So the idea of really combining those two fields of study, right? Aquaculture and then horticulture. And so generally the way we can think about answering your question is, okay, in a recirculating aquaculture system, in sort of a low tech, say you had a farmer out in a field, you already had existing orchard, right? You just want to irrigate that with fish doo-doo water, right?
Yeah.
So how big of a system do you have to make? Kind of low tech. Well, low tech, you probably want to exchange closer to 5 to 10% of your water per day. The systems I was talking about, the 1%, those are the really, really fancy, super expensive systems that, super scrub the water, and they have, spend a lot of electricity doing that.
Yeah.
So more of a lower tech, 5 to 10% of water per day. So if you calculate your orchard, right, how much water your orchard needs.
Yeah.
You can take that daily water use and scale it into a 5 to 10% exchange of
a tank,
right? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's kind of how we did it. We sort of, actually we did it the opposite way. We started with the tank, and because we just had the footprint, and we had a lot of tanks. And we're like, okay, how big does the orchard have to be to do that? But this is all part of you guys familiar with the Go Farm?
Yeah.
Program? Yeah. So this past year, Janelle Yamamoto, Ted Radich, and I partnered to develop a program, beginning farmer training program that is basically a offshoot of Go Farm called Go Fish.
Oh, I love it.
That is cool.
So that's if people are interested in starting in this, definitely come check out Go Fish.
Nice.
We started with it. It was only open to current or alumni Go Fish. Go Farm alumni. And we're thinking about, if we're looking for funding, basically we did it with no funding. We just leveraged resources and just did it.
Gave it a shot.
We're trying to get money for it. But the idea was to, Go Farm is full of super legitimate entrepreneurs doing their thing, right? And they already know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So how do we integrate aquaculture if they're interested into those operations? That was kind of the purpose of it. So on Oahu, most of the farmers are freshwater, Chinese catfish or tilapia. And you can do it, aquaponics is a good way to get started, like small scale aquaponics, just to see livestock, right? You guys got to feed them every day. You got to check on them all the time, right? I mean, there's all this, the usual
I was going to
stuff.
say, how small can you start? Can it be like a 10-gallon tank? Can it be, or should it be thinking like a cow water trough,
that's what I'm thinking
not
too,
like
right?
A giant one, but like one of the small, I don't know,
50, 100 gallons.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because that's exactly what we use. We use the water troughs, the poly water troughs as tanks. So it all depends, I guess, right? And on how big you want to go. So I guess the way that I like to talk to people about it, if they're thinking about doing it, is what do you want?
Right.
What are you trying to get out of it? Because that really just determines what the size of it should be. So if you want to eat a lot of fish, obviously you get a big tank, right? If some people just will never ever, they name their fish and then it's over. They just will never ever harvest their fish, right?
That was another question I was going to ask you. Do you have to harvest the fish, or can you just keep them in there forever and just, okay.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And if you're not interested in eating them, you can grow tilapia, but there's other fish. Tilapia so generally fish are what we call indeterminate growers. Well, definitely tilapia are indeterminate growers. So you can, if you hold them at high density, they stay small.
Yeah.
And then as you thin them out,
more space,
they'll grow. Even, years later, they'll have compensatory growth.
Oh, really?
Growth, right?
Wow.
Some other fish don't really do that, or they do to a much smaller degree. So if you want to just hold and the way we think about aquaculture is biomass, pounds per weight per volume. So if you don't want your biomass to change, because that's directly related to the amount of feed and oxygen you have to put into the system, right? If you want to hold it steady and you just want to grow vegetables, there's fish that you can grow and that won't really grow.
Wait.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Guppies, for example, carp, or like those feeder comets, those little feeder comets.
Oh yeah.
Some of the aquarium fish, they just won't grow. And if you just want them as pets to do the water for your plants, right? Then that's all you need.
That's a new technical word,
Yes.
term.
Yeah, we're gonna say that from now on.
Yes.
Water. It's like, I love it, but it's also true. Because that's what it is,
Yeah, and if you can't understand that, then well. Well, we talk so much about tilapia and all these other fish, but one thing that comes to my mind all the time when I think about aquaculture is our ahi and tuna and all that stuff. So maybe I have one last question for you, but maybe do you want to just touch upon that and what, how is that in relation to aquaculture here in Hawaii?
Yeah. So briefly, the ahi, those kind of animals require a lot of oxygen and really clean water.
Yeah.
And a lot of space. So that there are efforts underway. There are successful operations growing, for instance, bluefin, maguro, right? And other in Japan and in the Mediterranean also. Those are in cages offshore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has to be. There's no way you can do it on land. So there have been efforts in the past to do that. There's been resistance to cage culture, and there still is. Yeah. So I think I think the tide is shifting. I think people are getting a little more educated, a little more savvy about exactly what's going on. Technology is improving.
Yeah, right.
So I think you'll see more cages coming up in the future. We may or may not see ahi. I think one of the issues is, just to be completely honest about this, fishermen don't really want to see that. Right. So that may not happen. But we'll see. But yes, absolutely, it's possible. There are other fish though. Kona kampachi, you guys familiar with that? It's basically a kahala. It's our native kahala, short fin kahala. It's not the real big one. It's the sort of medium-sized kahala. Delicious. If you haven't tried it, please try it. The farm-raised Kona kampachi is super ono. Yeah.
Well, I guess that might answer my last question then. And most importantly is, where is everybody going to get the best place to get our New Year's sashimi, right? On the island. But particularly for Shannon and I, we were more concerned about Big Island because that's where we're located.
You know what I would say is, if you haven't checked out Nelha in Kona, I would say check it out. In fact, there's a researcher at Nelha right now, Neil Sims. His company is Ocean Era. They have closed the life cycle on one of the Nenui species that we have.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he's been growing, he's been feeding them a trout pellet. And he did some taste tests, and that one is a pretty yummy fish too.
Yeah.
Again, you are what you eat, right? It's not so limu-y.
Yeah.
100%. I've had pork that someone fed turnip greens to. I couldn't eat it. I was like,
it is what it
why
is.
does
you
this
are what
taste
you
like
eat.
this? I was like, this tastes kind of like turnip greens. And she's like, I didn't say that, but I was like, oh, what did you feed them? And they were like, oh, they're raised on turnip greens. I was like, this explains a lot.
Oh, we had this conversation too with Dr. Zhao, right, about the macnut cake, because we were talking about macnuts with poultry and the even with pork, right? Same thing. I prefer wild pork that have been eaten macnuts compared to wild.
It's delicious.
Because so that is very interesting.
I will tell you this real quick. I know we have to go, but I'm working on a project with are you guys familiar with Casey Ho in Henfest? Yep. So Casey Ho and Andre Seal and I are working on a project right now, because Andre and I come from the same lab at HIMB Tilapia lab, Tilapia Physiology lab. And when we were grad students, we would eat the seawater tilapia raw, poke and sashimi, and it is excellent.
Is
as
it
well.
Really?
Yes, and in Japan it's called izumi dai. That's, you'll find it in the sashimi restaurants as izumi dai, as tilapia. And so we're working on a project to hopefully kind of boost the local tilapia industry, because you can definitely, that's, we're talking about like smaller growers being able to produce a high quality product like that to
that'd be
not necessarily compete with ahi, but when there's dips or whatever to sort of supplement the market like that, there's a lot of potential.
Well, I think I've opened my mind. I always thought of sashimi every time just ahi, because that's how we grew up and whatnot. And then my in-laws and whatnot, they're like, no, they'll feed me another fish. I'm like, what? Just eat it. They tell me, and then they'll tell me what it is, and it's good, And so then my father-in-law and whatnot, and my husband's grandma, nenui was another thing they talked about, eating sashimi, and I was just like, nenui, really? But some people it does, but it is what the animal eats, really does impact the quality and taste of that protein. So wow, is there anything else, Kai, you want to share or add or plug in any programs? We're happy to share that information.
I just to drop anchor with you guys. I'm also kind of still affiliated with CTAR. I'm part of the food systems working group with Soti Ng and Noah Lincoln, and I'm still affiliate MBBE faculty, so I still work a lot with CTAR students, and so any projects you guys want to collaborate on, or
for sure,
let's do it. Yeah, that's it.
I'm around, so I was like, and I'm across all commodities. So.
Yeah. You're based in Oahu, Kai, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And because of COVID, haven't met Shuri in person yet. It's all been Zoom for the past year.
We understand a lot.
Yeah. Same here. Oh, well, thank you so much. We're so glad that we were able to have you on the show today.
Yes.
Thank you, Kai, for taking the time to talk story with Shannon and I.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really hope the listeners gain some insight into aquaculture in Hawaii and learn some tips on how to get started if they want to get started, where to go, and the resources to reach out to. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And to all of our listeners, make sure you join our Facebook page, the Livestock Extension Group, if you haven't already. And be sure to visit the CTAR Extension website and our YouTube channel listed in the show notes below. And we will put any websites that we can from Kai related to like Go Fish and Go Farm and stuff, so that y'all can check those out, because that sounds really exciting to me.
I know, right? That's a very catchy Go Fish. I love that.
I know. I love that.
Yeah. So for any additional information about this topic or other resources, you can also see the Hawaiʻi Sea Grant website, which will be listed in the show notes of the podcast and the description box of our YouTube page. Thanks again for listening to the Livestock Walaʻau. And before we go, as Shannon will always say, show some love for your favorite podcast. That's us. By leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to listen. Ahui ho to next year. And e haoli makahiki ho to you all. Take care. Ahui ho.